In the early hours of July 16, 1969, crowds flocked to Central Florida's beaches, eager to witness history. The nation had been preparing for this moment for nearly a decade, ever since the late President John F. Kennedy, faced with the Soviet Union's early successes in space, declared putting men on the moon a national goal. Around Cape Canaveral, recently renamed Cape Kennedy, roads and causeways brimmed with spectators. Minor dignitaries, as well as friends and families of NASA employees, had special grandstand seats on the grounds of the Kennedy Space Center, ready to watch the Apollo 11 astronauts soar toward the moon. While the broader public harbored great faith in NASA's ability to land humans on the lunar surface, those working in the space industry privately gave the mission only a 50-50 chance of success. The Apollo 11 crew had spent countless hours in simulators, practicing for every conceivable scenario. Still, the training equipment could only approximate real conditions in space, and some of the contraptions, like the gravity gantry at NASA's Langley Research Center, appeared downright strange. In the final hours before launch, the towering Saturn V rocket, its massive tanks continually topped up, waited on the launch pad. Michael Collins, having flown on Gemini 10, served as the command module pilot. Edwin Buzz Aldrin, who had perfected spacewalk techniques on Gemini 12, was the lunar module pilot. Neil Armstrong, the mission commander, had coolly saved Gemini 8 from near disaster. Now, all three formed a veteran team, handpicked to tackle any challenges that might arise. NASA missions always carried baggage from prior flights. Each success, each anomaly informed the next launch. Yet the relentless goal of reaching the moon before 1970 meant there would be points of genuine uncertainty, even for such an experienced crew. Despite this, Americans brimmed with confidence. Launch parties sprang up nationwide, and local businesses seized the opportunity to celebrate. At the Kennedy Launch Center, tension soared. German-born rocket pioneer Wernher von Braun had dedicated his life to moments like this. Technicians understood that countless components had to function perfectly at once. Astronauts always admitted that launch was the most nerve-wracking phase of any mission. This was only the sixth launch of the mighty Saturn V, and though a few earlier flights had been bumpy, they were labeled successful enough. T-15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6. Seconds after liftoff, control shifted from the firing room at the pad to mission control in Houston. 12 minutes later, Apollo 11 achieved low Earth orbit. Aside from some vibration from the third stage, nothing seemed amiss. Tasks like translunar injection and docking with the lunar module were now standard procedure, and the flight manuals, extensively rewritten thanks to earlier missions, proved their worth. Although the Apollo spacecraft could navigate autonomously, radio-ranging innovations allowed mission control to send precise guidance to the crew. Still, command module pilots took pride in verifying their position using the onboard sextant and the Apollo guidance computer, one of the first practical microcomputers. Upon entering lunar orbit, Apollo 11 lost radio contact whenever it swung behind the moon. On the 13th orbit, the lunar module separated from the command module. They adopted individual call signs: Columbia, the command module, and Eagle, the lunar module. Descending to the moon involved 3 phases, each managed by its own computer program. Initially, the crew traveled feet first, gazing up at Earth. Next, Eagle tilted into a more upright position, giving Armstrong and Aldrin their first direct view of the Sea of Tranquility. This broad, flat plain was chosen as the easiest site for the first landing. Suddenly, the fuel began sloshing in the lunar module's tanks, annoying but not dangerous. Then a new alarm sounded. 1202, 1202. Give us a reading on that 1202 program alarm. Only a young software engineer in mission control knew precisely what 1202 meant. The flight computer was overloaded but could still manage vital functions. The mission pressed on. As Eagle neared touchdown, the computer remained in control, yet Armstrong could override descent rates and horizontal velocity. Spotting hazardous boulders below, he took charge, seeking a safer site. They lingered in the air longer than planned, and fuel was draining away. 60 seconds, lights on, down 2.5 to forward. At last, Armstrong, engine stop. With these words, Houston heard, "Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted. Relief in mission control was palpable. Some controllers confessed they nearly turned blue from holding their breath. Because of the frantic descent, no one immediately knew Eagle's exact landing spot. Once the spacecraft was secured, the official plan called for a rest period. Armstrong and Aldrin, however, asked to begin sooner, and mission control agreed. About 7 hours later, Armstrong descended the ladder. A black and white camera broadcast the moment to an estimated 600 million viewers worldwide. No one had imagined history on live TV at the dawn of spaceflight. NASA soon realized future moonwalks had best be scheduled for primetime audiences. Armstrong and Aldrin spent roughly 2.5 hours on the lunar surface, much of it consumed by ceremony. They planted the US flag and spoke briefly with the president by radio. After a smooth ascent back to lunar orbit, they rejoined Collins in Columbia. The 3-day coast home was tranquil compared to the storm of public adoration waiting for them. Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins found themselves paraded through American streets amid ticker-tape extravaganzas, then continued their victory lap around the globe. Yet despite, or perhaps because of these accolades, NASA's generous budget was suddenly under scrutiny. Some questioned whether sending men to the moon was truly worth the cost. When the final space shuttle landed in 2011, the United States, key backer of the International Space Station, had no independent means of launching its own astronauts and relied on Russia's spacecraft instead. For supplies, NASA contracted private companies like SpaceX, whose Dragon capsule has been delivering cargo to orbit since 2012 and can also return payloads to Earth. Its next iteration, Dragon version 2, slated for a crewed debut soon, uses advanced materials and propulsion systems to reduce costs. The Falcon 9 rocket that propels it attempts to land its first stage on a platform at sea, a complicated process requiring further refinement. In 2006, the European Space Agency embarked on a unique star mapping mission called Gaia. Placed 1.5 million kilometers beyond Earth, Gaia orbits the Sun and rotates to continuously scan the Milky Way, measuring stellar positions with extraordinary accuracy. 2 telescopes focus light onto a huge, high-resolution camera. Over 5 years, Gaia will map the same regions 70 times, using parallax shifts to deduce distances. It also collects 2 types of spectral data, one indicating stellar velocity, the other revealing chemical composition. Launched at the end of 2013, Gaia has performed reliably. It maneuvers via cold nitrogen thrusters that preserve its thermal stability. Gaia's data can flow to Earth at 3 megabytes per second, relayed through ESA's ground stations in Cebreros, Spain, and New Norcia in Western Australia. From Apollo's audacious landing to Gaia's quiet scanning of distant stars, humanity's quest to explore remains undimmed. Each mission, each innovation, adds a new chapter to an ever-evolving story, one that continues to captivate and inspire,